Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's see the top stories this hour. Israel expands military pressure in Lebanon and Gaza. Ukraine urges Europe to take a bigger role in peace efforts as US-led diplomacy struggles to gain momentum. And the Hajj pilgrimage draws millions amid Middle East tensions. The Israeli military is intensifying operations in Lebanon after a rise in Hezbollah drone attacks, while Israeli authorities say they killed the new leader of Hamas' armed wing in Gaza despite a fragile ceasefire. Blake Sifton reports for A News.
The Israeli military says they have carried out 150 strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern and eastern Lebanon. On Tuesday, health authorities in Lebanon say that dozens of people were killed in those attacks. Now, all of this follows a call by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the military to intensify their operations in Lebanon and for soldiers to push further into the country and, in his words, intensify the blows against Hezbollah. Now, all of that follows what's been a major strategic shift on the ground in southern Lebanon in recent weeks, where Israeli forces are stationed some 10 kilometers into Lebanese territory. Hezbollah is increasingly using the kind of small first-person view suicide drones that have transformed the battlefield in Ukraine. They're using these small drones to target Israeli soldiers stationed in Lebanon. They are posting many videos every day of these drones striking soldiers as well as Israeli military vehicles. And these drones are attached to a thin fiber optic cable, which means that they are immune from jamming, and the Israeli military has so far not had an answer to combat them. Hezbollah is also increasingly using these drones on Israeli border communities. Now, in ordering the military to advance further into Lebanon, analysts believe that the military and the government are trying to push Hezbollah further north out of range of using these drones with the fiber optic cables. Now, under pressure from the United States, the Israeli military has mostly avoided striking Beirut and eastern Lebanon in these daily airstrikes that they have been carrying out since a very shaky ceasefire came into effect last month. But with this intensification of operations, there are concerns that they may now begin carrying out strikes in more sensitive areas. And of course, we need to remember that Iran has included an end to Israeli attacks against Hezbollah as a major demand of theirs in negotiations with the United States. So these intensifying operations could jeopardize those talks. Now, meanwhile, the Israeli government and military says that they have killed on Tuesday night the new leader of Hamas's military wing in Gaza. That follows the killing of his predecessor only 11 days before. A ceasefire was agreed, of course, in Gaza in October, but some 900 Palestinians have been killed since in various strikes and shootings by Israeli forces. President Trump's Gaza peace plan has stalled in its second phase as the war in Iran has distracted attention, with many stakeholders distracted and, of course, under attack themselves in that war. Blake Sifton for A News in Tel Aviv.
The fragile ceasefire between Iran and the United States is facing renewed pressure after fresh American strikes near the Strait of Hormuz. Washington says the operation was defensive. Tehran is calling it a violation of the truce.
Iran has accused the United States of committing what it called a gross violation of the truce with the new strikes it launched on the country. The strikes were confirmed by US Central Command, which said American forces targeted Iranian missile sites and boats allegedly preparing to place mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The US described the operation as a self-defense strike aimed at protecting its troops and securing the vital shipping route. Iran's foreign ministry strongly condemned the attacks, calling them aggressive and unjustified. Tehran warned that it would respond to what it described as hostile actions and said the United States would be responsible for the consequences. The strikes reportedly took place near Bandar Abbas, home to a major Iranian naval base along the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil transit routes. Iran's blockade of the waterway has already pushed global energy prices higher. Iranian state media said explosions were heard in the area, while the Revolutionary Guard later claimed it had shot down a US drone and fired at an American fighter jet that entered Iranian airspace. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issued a strong warning in a message carried by Iranian media during the Day of Arafah, part of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Khamenei said Middle Eastern nations and territories would no longer serve as shields for US military bases. He added that the hands of time will not turn back, signaling what he described as a new regional order taking shape. The developments come during ongoing negotiations aimed at extending the ceasefire reached on April 8th after weeks of deadly conflict. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says a deal is still possible within days. But President Donald Trump has signaled caution, telling negotiators not to rush the talks.
Ukraine is pushing Europe to take a bigger role in peace efforts as US-led diplomacy struggles to gain momentum. The appeal comes amid renewed Russian strikes and growing concern in European capitals over the direction of the war.
Ukraine is calling on the European Union to take a more active role in ending the war with Russia ahead of an informal meeting of EU foreign ministers in Cyprus. Kiev is seeking what it calls new dynamics in the negotiation process, with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha pushing for a new format of talks involving greater European participation as US-led mediation efforts stall and Russia escalates its military campaign. The EU is reportedly considering renewed engagement with Moscow even as Russian forces continue heavy strikes across Ukraine, which Kiev and its allies say have killed civilians and damaged critical infrastructure. Earlier, Russian officials, meanwhile, have warned of further systematic strikes on Kiev, urging foreign diplomats and citizens to leave the capital. The Kremlin says the attacks are in response to Ukrainian drone operations, while Ukraine rejects responsibility and calls the threats blackmail. At the United Nations, Ukraine's envoy Andriy Melnik accused Russia of intensifying attacks on civilians and infrastructure and called for a full ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian forces.
On the night of May 23 to May 24, Russian armed forces launched one of the largest combined attacks against Ukraine, employing hundreds of aerial weapons, including ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles. For the city of Kiev, this was one of the most devastating attacks recorded to date.
The escalation has drawn international concern. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council he is deeply concerned by Russia's plan for expanded strikes in Ukraine, warning that further escalation could prolong civilian suffering and delay peace. European countries, including Germany, the Netherlands and Norway, have summoned Russian envoys in protest, while EU officials have condemned Moscow's warnings to diplomats as an unacceptable escalation and urged an immediate ceasefire. Russia has defended its actions, saying it is targeting military-linked facilities and rejecting Western criticism, while insisting its campaign will continue.
Latvia says it's strengthening anti-drone defences along its borders with Russia and Belarus, following a series of incidents involving drones entering NATO airspace. Military officials say new interceptor drone teams will begin patrolling border areas within weeks as concerns grow over spillover risks from the war in Ukraine. The move comes after several Ukrainian drones reportedly veered into Baltic airspace, which Kyiv says was caused by Russian signal jamming. Latvian officials say the growing use of small military drones is creating new security challenges for NATO as countries race to adapt to rapidly evolving battlefield technology.
We need to increase this number, not only as Latvia, but as well different countries. We need to increase this teams with classical armament, with interceptor drones, with different. We need to increase, but we need to find this balance between the peacetime and wartime. because we will, if we put the teams to, for example, to every kilometer, we will burn out soon all the resources of the armed forces, because it's thousands of the men and so on. We need to find this balance. In general, it is not a technological challenge. We have all the technologies. We have the radars, acoustic systems. In general, we can buy and install. It's just like a question about the resource, how money you spend. But there is not some technologies what you need to invent. Everything already is invented and you just need to do it. But regarding to small drones, this is challenging.
The United Kingdom has imposed new sanctions targeting Russia-linked cryptocurrency platforms, banks and financial networks accused of helping to bypass existing restrictions. Officials say the measures cover 18 individuals and entities with assets frozen and UK firms banned from processing payments or maintaining financial ties with the designated networks. London says the action is aimed at disrupting what it calls, quote, shadow financial systems linked to Russia's war economy, including firms operating across multiple jurisdictions. A new survey suggests European companies are still maintaining or expanding their production networks in mainland China, despite ongoing efforts to reduce exposure, with most firms reporting either growth or stability in their supply chain strategies.
Nearly 7 in 10 European companies operating in mainland China say they are either staying put or expanding their supply chains, according to a new EU Chamber of Commerce survey of almost 300 members. Around 1/3 of respondents said they were increasing their presence in China, while 37% reported no change in strategy over the past 2 years. Overall, 68% are either maintaining or expanding operations, compared with just 7% who said they are moving sourcing or production outside the country. Jens Eskelund, president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, said companies do not see supply chain reduction in China becoming a dominant trend, adding that firms remain increasingly dependent on the country as a sourcing and manufacturing base. Logistics executive Michael Aldwell told CNBC's Squawk Box Asia that more supply chain activity is now being managed from within China as local systems mature.
Rising amount of business in our industry that's controlled, decided, shipped, and paid for here in China. And we see that in the big emerging industries of China, so in automotive, in battery production, in technology, in consumer electronics goods.
Aldwell added that this reflects a broader shift as Chinese firms take greater control of international supply chains where delivery is increasingly managed end-to-end from China to global markets. Cost and efficiency appear to be key drivers behind the trend. Chinese factories have rapidly increased automation, reducing reliance on labor and allowing faster production. Chinese EV maker NIO was cited as an example, with one of its factories operating 941 robots capable of running continuously without workers on the production floor. Around 3/4 of EU firms surveyed said their operations in China were more efficient than elsewhere, with lower energy and raw material costs also contributing to China's manufacturing advantage. Overall, the findings suggest European firms continue to balance diversification efforts with a sustained reliance on China's scale, speed, and industrial ecosystem.
Staying in China, as the country's climate numbers are under fresh scrutiny after a new report suggested updated accounting methods may have sharply changed the picture on emissions growth. The revised figures point to slower growth than previously thought, but experts warn this is about mythology, not necessarily a real-world fall in pollution.
A new report says China's updated method for calculating carbon emissions may have cut previously estimated emissions growth in half between 2020 and 2025. Researchers say emissions now appear to have risen by around 7% during the period instead of the earlier estimate of 14%. The report says the change is linked to revisions in China's climate accounting methods, including how fossil fuels are used and industrial emissions are measured. Analysts say that the new calculations could make comparisons with previous years more difficult and have sparked debate over emissions reporting standards. China remains the world's largest carbon emitter. Beijing has pledged to peak carbon emissions before 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2060. Experts stress that the revised figures do not necessarily mean emissions actually fell, but reflect changes in methodology. At the same time, China continues investing heavily in solar, wind, and electric vehicle production while still relying on coal for energy security and economic growth. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
The World Health Organization is stepping up its response in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with its chief visiting affected areas as health teams warn that violence and poor access are hampering operations. The UN says the WHO chief is travelling to the Democratic Republic of Congo as the Ebola outbreak worsens, with more than 900 suspected cases and 220 suspected deaths reported. Health teams are providing essential services, but violence and poor access continue to slow the response. Millions of Muslims have gathered in Saudi Arabia for Hajj, performing prayers at Mount Arafat before continuing rituals in Mecca as regional tensions remain high.
More than 1.5 million Muslims have gathered in Mecca for the annual Hajj pilgrimage, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. In the Saudi Arabia city, pilgrims performed the tawaf, walking 7 times around the Kaaba at the Grand Mosque, as part of the sacred rituals that symbolize faith, unity, and devotion. Other rites include the symbolic stoning of the devil. Earlier, millions gathered at Mount Arafat, around 20 kilometers from Mecca, for the most important stage of the pilgrimage. Pilgrims spent hours praying, reflecting, and reciting verses from the Quran during the day of Arafah, considered the spiritual peak of Hajj. The pilgrimage brings together Muslims from across the world in a shared act of worship and humility. This year's Hajj also comes amid regional tensions, following US and Israeli attacks on Iran earlier this year.
Eid al-Adha is being marked by Muslim communities around the world with prayers, family gatherings and messages of resilience at a time of regional uncertainty. From Istanbul and Baku to Karachi, Indonesia and Gaza, the holiday is being observed in different ways, but with a shared focus on faith, unity and hope.
Millions of Muslims across the globe are celebrating Eid al-Adha on Wednesday, one of the most sacred festivals in Islam, marked by prayers, charity, family gatherings and reflection. This year, Eid al-Adha is being observed on May 27th in many countries, while some nations are celebrating on May 28th, depending on moon sightings and decisions by local Islamic authorities. Countries across the Middle East, Asia, Europe, Africa and North America have joined in the celebrations. In Istanbul, large crowds gathered at mosques across the city for Eid prayers on the first day of the holiday. Worshippers began arriving early in the morning, filling mosques and prayer grounds, as both local residents and foreign visitors took part in the celebrations. Muslims across Azerbaijan, including in the capital Baku, also performed Eid prayers at mosques nationwide, with communities coming together in a spirit of unity and devotion. In Karachi city of Pakistan, large numbers of worshippers gathered to mark the occasion with special Eid prayers, as families and communities celebrated together across the country. Muslims across Indonesia gathered at mosques to observe Eid al-Adha with communal prayers and celebrations, while many also expressed concern over rising prices and ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
My hope for us as the Indonesian nation, our hope is that we will all be peaceful because it has a huge influence and a big impact on our economic situation.
Despite the ongoing tensions, Palestinians in Gaza City attended Eid al-Adha prayers on Wednesday, gathering at mosques across the city in observance of the holiday. For many communities, this year's Eid carries a message of resilience and hope during challenging times. Across different regions, prayers have been offered for peace, stability, and a brighter future for humanity.
The race back to the moon is no longer just about planting flags, it's about building something that can last. NASA says private companies will now play a central role in creating the foundations for long-term lunar operations, as Washington looks ahead to Mars and keeps one eye on China's own ambitions.
NASA has announced plans for a series of privately funded lunar missions aimed at establishing a sustainable presence on the Moon. Named Moonbase, the missions will oversee preparations for astronaut surface operations. The space agency has awarded contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars to 4 US companies to deliver robotic landers, hopping drones and vehicles. Jeff Bezos' space company, Blue Origin, is among the firms selected to build the machines.
Now, Moonbase 1 will be the first privately funded lunar lander mission in history. The Blue Origin Mark I Endurance lander will deliver multiple payloads to the Shackleton Connecting Ridge, a strategic area of the lunar South Pole. In addition to flying 2 NASA science payloads, SCALPs, a lunar retroreflector array, the mission objective is to demonstrate critical capabilities that reduce risk for the human landing system missions.
NASA says the goal of the moon base is to support the development of a lunar economy while conducting scientific research and laying the groundwork for future missions to Mars.
We envision the moon base to be hundreds of square miles with different assets, all building up to the objective of permanent lunar presence on the moon. To get there, we're going to break it up in phases, and phase 1 has already started.
The second phase will involve the construction of semi-permanent infrastructure, while the third phase aims to establish a sustained presence through routine crew rotations and continuous surface activity. The United States hopes to return astronauts to the moon before President Donald Trump leaves office in 2029. NASA is also competing with China in the race to return humans to the lunar surface, with Beijing aiming to land astronauts on the moon by 2030.
After the break, we'll take a look at rising security concerns across northern Europe as unidentified drone activity near NATO territory becomes harder to track and more difficult to explain. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. As concerns grow over unidentified drone activity near NATO's northern frontier, security officials across the Baltic region and Finland are warning that incidents are becoming more frequent, more sophisticated, and increasingly difficult to trace. Joining us now from Sao Paulo, Brazil, is political analyst Diogo Castro Silva to discuss what these incursions could mean for regional security deterrence and NATO's evolving response along its eastern flank. Diogo, welcome to the program.
Hi there.
Now, these drones keep appearing near NATO's borders, but no one wants to say clearly who's behind them. Is that uncertainty the whole point?
In part it is, but one has to see the wider context why this is happening. You have a few developments that are, I think, worth pointing out. First of all, the critical support player to Ukraine is Europe. So Europe is the critical support for Ukraine. Secondly, as the Ukraine war starts to go worse and worse, and there is less perspective of Russia achieving its objectives, there is the temptation to put pressure on Europe by Russia. So the question of horizontal escalation, meaning very similar to what Iran has done in the Gulf by aiming against Gulf states and not directly only to US and Israel. This is something I'm sure it's in Russia's minds, and you have to prepare the terrain somewhat for that action by creating uncertainty and ambiguity about threats against some of the northern European states, but not only those, but more generally in the whole Eastern Europe.
And now NATO has huge armies, jets and missile systems, but are cheap drones now showing a very expensive weakness?
You have two problems in the question of drones. One is the one you mentioned, is a question of asymmetry of cost, meaning today only Ukraine has the technology that allows to shoot down drones at an acceptable cost ratio. This is what Ukraine has been doing for some time. This is why Ukraine went to help the Gulf states when they were being attacked by Iran. Expensive interceptors and systems are not a way to go to shoot down this kind of drones because the cost ratio is really disadvantageous. The second aspect is a question of the difficulty in creating a response. Drones create a low threshold or a below threshold response when they are doing this kind of incursions. It creates a difficulty on whoever is being the country that is suffering the incursions, what to do to deter Russia or Belarus, because both actors can be playing this game, in terms of deterring them to do this kind of incursions. So a different kind of response has to be devised by increasing the costs to Russia and Belarus to do this kind of incursions and signaling those responses as the ones that these countries are doing. You have probably to do some intelligence, some cyber attacks, something that can really signal to Russia and Belarus that this kind of incursions might have a cost. But it's not simple, and this is something that European countries are struggling with.
And Diogo, some analysts argue that these incidents may be probing exercises designed to test NATO reactions, readiness and airspace vulnerabilities. Is that a credible assessment in your opinion?
I think, yes, they can gather information, but I would say on the order of the factors I explained to you, this is probably, I think, the less relevant for Russia. This is more a psyops and something to prepare a window to do something more threatening than really just doing intelligence work about reaction times, which I think Russia has a pretty good idea on NATO doctrine and what NATO would do in terms of response time. So I would give less weight to that factor.
And now Finland joined NATO to feel safer, but are incidents like this making the country safer or simply putting it closer to confrontation?
Well, Finland, I think, did that, one, to make it safer, but secondly, to finally get rid, because don't forget, Finland was a kind of an imposition. The neutrality of Finland was an imposition out of the Second World War, and it constrained Finland options for a long time in terms of its foreign policy. Of course, it joined NATO at the moment of vulnerability, of perceived vulnerability, given Russia actions in Ukraine. But I think there was a deeper meaning in terms of finally getting rid of any shackles that USSR at that time had imposed on Finland. Now, I don't know if it feels more vulnerable by being in NATO. I think on the contrary, I think it continues to feel safer. It's only that the security environment is a lot less safer than it was before, and that is because of Russia's actions. Because don't forget, Russia never attacked a NATO country. It attacked Ukraine, in fact, or Georgia, because they were not in NATO. They were in that no man's land that it was the worst of both worlds. But they never attacked a NATO country. So I don't think Finland feels less safe. I just think the security environment around Finland and around Europe is much less safer.
Okay, and Diogo, where's NATO's red line? Does one drone have to crash, hit something or kill someone before the alliance knows how to respond?
I think NATO has two problems to reply correctly to your question. One is the deterrence factor, because US actions have deeply fragilized the alliance. I mean, even this week it has been announced that it would draw down assets, and there is a lot of questions what US would do if a NATO country would be attacked. So the deterrence of NATO is much weaker because of that, and that is a reality NATO countries have to face. The second is, like I said before, what kind of responses do you do to this kind of drone non-lethal incursions? In my belief, NATO countries, or at least European countries, need to devise much more aggressive responses in other domains other than military, because in purely military terms, besides shooting the drones, you don't really have, it's difficult to devise an answer, and it's difficult to deter. What would you do? Also fly drones in Russia? I don't think that's the right response. So they have to devise responses in other domains like cyber attacks or other kind of actions that really can signal to Russia that this kind of incursions are not admissible.
Diogo, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I appreciate your time and analysis today.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Azerbaijan says the UN system must be more effective, more inclusive and more firmly anchored in international law. Speaking in New York, Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov said justice, regional cooperation and reform should remain central to global peace efforts.
Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov addressed a UN Security Council open debate on maintaining international peace and security. Held in New York under the presidency of China, the UN Security Council debate focused strengthening the UN-centered international system. In his speech, Bayramov stressed the necessity of ending impunity for violations of international law and ensuring justice. The minister stated that Azerbaijan is among the countries that have experienced the grave consequences of violations of the UN Charter and shortcomings in the implementation of international law.
Mr. President, Azerbaijan has itself experienced the devastating consequences of violations of the UN Charter and the failure in enforcing international law. Today, having emerged as a leading contributor to regional stability and reinforcing its peace agenda through tangible actions, Azerbaijan continues to advocate for a revitalized and reformed multilateral system with the United Nations at its core. Such a system also requires better utilization of regional organizations and formats that share the objective of the UN and contribute to their attainment.
The speech also highlighted the importance of reforms aimed at making the UN system more effective, inclusive and responsive. The minister emphasized the importance of regional organizations and cooperation formats operating in accordance with the goals and principles of the UN.
Azerbaijan has significantly contributed to multilateralism over the past years. This includes our result-oriented chairmanship in the non-aligned movement, our exemplary presidency and hosting of COP29 and the World Urban Forum, and our ongoing chairmanship of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia. To conclude, I recall that the Charter of the United Nations is built on the premise that through unity and cooperation, nations can establish a durable framework for peace, justice, and the rule of law.
During the visit, Minister Bayramov also met with the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in New York. The parties exchanged views on regional peace and security, sustainable development, climate action, and ongoing efforts to strengthen the effectiveness of the UN-centered international system.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev have held a phone call ahead of Eid al-Adha, pledging to strengthen ties and regional cooperation. Our correspondent Tura Shireliliu has more.
The President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, and the Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev held a phone call on Tuesday on the advent of Eid al-Adha, during which they vowed to develop the mutual cooperation between their neighboring countries for expansion of regional prosperity and security. According to the Iranian President's office, the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to constructive cooperation aimed at achieving regional stability, prosperity, and sustainable development. President Pezeshkian expressed his gratitude for Azerbaijan's constructive stance and support during the Israel-US war with Iran, stressing that regional interactions are key to securing long-term peace and security. He also congratulated President Aliyev on the occasion of Azerbaijan's Independence Day on 28th of May. The office of Iranian president added that Azerbaijan's president wished peace and prosperity for the Iranian nation and voiced his country's strong support for an end to regional conflicts. The two presidents further exchanged views on bilateral cooperation in macroeconomic sectors, transit, and people-to-people exchanges. They stressed the necessity of accelerating the implementation of existing agreements to elevate the level of mutual relations. President Pezeshkian also held phone calls with presidents of Egypt, Iraq, Kyrgyzstan, Malaysia, Tajikistan, and Turkey, Emir of Qatar, Sultan of Oman, and Prime Minister of Iraq on the occasion of Eid al-Adha, discussing with them the expansion of bilateral ties and the latest regional developments. Tura Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Turkey is intensifying diplomatic contacts over rising regional tensions, with President Erdogan holding talks with the leaders of Iran and Pakistan amid renewed focus on US-Iran negotiations and Middle East stability. Here are the details.
Turkey is maintaining a high level of diplomatic engagement as regional tensions continue to simmer around Iran and the broader Middle East. According to the Turkish Communications Directorate, President Erdogan held separate phone calls on Tuesday with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. During his call with Pezeshkian, Erdogan reportedly said Ankara would continue supporting indirect talks between Iran and the United States, with the aim of achieving what he described as positive results. He also said that the ongoing regional conflict had cast a shadow over the Muslim Eid al-Adha holiday, which began on Tuesday, while also voicing hope that the Iranian people would overcome the difficult circumstances currently facing the country. In his phone call with Pakistan's Prime Minister, Erdogan stressed the importance of close Turkey-Pakistan relations, highlighting the mediating roles played by both countries. Tuesday's phone calls were part of a broader diplomatic push by Ankara in recent days. Over the weekend, Erdogan spoke with several regional leaders, as well as U.S. President Donald Trump, amid renewed speculation over a possible diplomatic breakthrough with Tehran. Those discussions came alongside increasing diplomatic activity surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points, through which roughly a fifth of globally traded oil passes. There have also been mounting concerns in recent days about a possible resumption of U.S.-Iran hostilities, which would likely have major implications for regional stability, global energy markets, and international shipping routes. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Britain has sanctioned 3 Georgia-registered companies accused of helping Russia bypass restrictions after investigators link them to crypto payments and shadow financial networks. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has the details.
The United Kingdom says 3 companies registered in Georgia helped Russia evade sanctions. These companies are Arvix, Rapira Group and Avery. According to British authorities and blockchain investigators, these firms were involved in Russia's shadow financial system. One of them, Rapira, was registered in Georgia in November 2022, just months after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Investigators say it handled millions of dollars in crypto transactions linked to sanctioned Russian networks. Another company, Avery, reportedly helped convert cash into cryptocurrency through operations in Moscow, Dubai and Turkey. It was also involved in payments linked to Russia-China trade outside the regular banking system. Georgia's National Bank says none of the companies were under its supervision, but it also confirmed that in September 2025 it identified the firms operating without registration and passed information to law enforcement. That was 8 months ago. Now, questions are growing in Georgia. What action was taken after the warning? Who received the information? And why did it take UK sanctions for the case to become public? The UK has sanctioned more than 3,300 people, companies and vessels linked to Russia. 3 of those companies were registered in Georgia. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is to arrive in Kazakhstan today for a 3-day state visit centered on energy, trade and regional security talks with President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The visit coincides with the EU summit in Astana, where leaders are set to discuss economic integration, transport routes and regional cooperation. A key expected outcome is a nuclear energy deal, with Russia reportedly financing most of Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant since the Soviet era. Energy transit is also on the agenda, including Russian oil flows to China via Kazakhstan. Politically, the trip underlines Astana's balancing act between Moscow, Beijing and the West, as well as regional partners. Uzbekistan is sending its first cargo shipment to Syria as both sides look to build new trade links through Aleppo. Our correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Uzbek companies have agreed to send the first shipment of goods to Syria using 10 cargo trucks. The agreement was reached during online negotiations organized by Chamber of Commerce and Industry with the participation of Uzbek and Syrian business representatives. According to the deal, 4 trucks could transport household appliances, another 4 will carry cooking oil products, while 2 trucks will deliver spare car parts and motor oils. The discussion also focused on logistics routes, demand for Uzbek products and the development of trade operations through the newly opened Uzbek-Syrian Trade House in Aleppo. Last week, Uzbekistan officially launched its first trade house and distribution center in the Syrian city of Aleppo, under the Made in Uzbekistan brand. Officials estimate delivery time to Syria at around 10 days, with transportation cost averaging $2,500 per container. Earlier, Chamber of Commerce Chairman Davon Vahabov said Uzbek exports to Syria could reach between $100 and $150 million in 2026, mainly through supplies of automobiles, electrical equipment and food products. It is Sivil Rajab reported from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Afghanistan's economy is showing signs of growth, but the World Bank says this is not improving people's lives. Its new Afghanistan Development Update warns that falling aid, regional tensions and the return of millions of Afghans are putting more pressure on the country. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Here in Kabul, the World Bank says Afghanistan's economy is experiencing moderate growth and macroeconomic stability has been relatively maintained. But the report stresses that this growth is not translating into better living standards for ordinary Afghans. According to the report, one of the main challenges is rapid population growth, driven largely by the return of millions of Afghans from neighboring countries. This has increased pressure on jobs, housing, food, and basic services. As a result, income per person is falling, meaning many families are becoming worse off despite overall economic growth. The report also warns that Afghanistan's future outlook remains fragile. Declining international aid, increasing external pressure, regional tensions, and weak trade are making the country more vulnerable. The World Bank says the economy may continue to grow, but without more jobs, higher incomes, and stronger support for basic services, many Afghans are unlikely to feel any real improvement in their daily lives. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
After the break, we'll take a look at the growing economic ties between Azerbaijan and the UAE. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We now shift our focus to a regional story for discussion. Azerbaijan and the United Arab Emirates are deepening their economic relationship after their comprehensive economic partnership agreement officially entered into force. The deal is expected to expand trade, investment and cooperation across sectors ranging from energy and logistics to technology and infrastructure, as both countries look to strengthen connectivity between the Gulf and the South Caucasus. Joining us now from Budapest is Farid Shokulu to discuss what this agreement could mean for Azerbaijan's broader regional and economic ambitions. Welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Dilekaram.
Now, we hear a lot about trade agreements, but what makes this one strategically important for Azerbaijan at this time?
This comprehensive economic partnership agreement was inked by Mikhail Jabarov and Tani bin Ahmed to strengthen economic relations, particularly between Baku and Abu Dhabi. It consists of 18 chapters, mostly focusing on commitment to remove 99% of Azerbaijan's export to the United Arab Emirates, while repealing 98.5% of Emirati originating goods to Azerbaijan. One of the most important aspects of this agreement is that Azerbaijan's national AI strategy, which will be covered by this agreement as well. This economic partnership agreement also supports small to medium-sized businesses in both countries, as well as focusing on reducing transportation costs and logistical access in the Silk Road region.
Farid, I also want to ask you about this Emirati vision. So we know there's 4 pillars of this vision in the context of enhancing relations with Azerbaijan. Where does the Emirati vision fit?
If we look at the Emirati vision, I will tell you a personal story about how the Emiratis view their own country. When John Recorder was presented by Emirati officials about their country's vision to create the new Europe in the Middle East, they took 2 model countries. One was Singapore because of their logistical and transit position in the region, as well as Israel, which is similarly sized, both population-wise and the geographic size of the countries. And I believe Azerbaijan is more or less the same because, one, the Emiratis want peace. And the second, we have peace with Armenia. The Emiratis will keep on investing in our country. And why Azerbaijan is important for the Emiratis, I believe it has a simple answer, because Azerbaijan is a reliable supplier of oil and gas to 16 countries in Europe, as well as Syria right now, funded by the Qataris and Saudi Arabians. And during the conflicts in the Middle East, Azerbaijan has also managed to supply Israel with oil that was essential for the country. And that's why they rely on Azerbaijan as a paternal country. And that being said, the Emiratis hosted both Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan to support the peace efforts back in 2025.
Okay, Farid, I'd really like to continue this conversation with you, but unfortunately we're out of time for this hour. Thank you so much for joining us on A News and for your analysis today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.